Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Julia Brewer Daily. Nice to see you, Julia. Looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So I love the conversations with, fellow adoptees, and yeah, it makes my heart sing. So when we chatted a couple of months ago, you talked about squashing our feelings down, and as I said before we started recording today, that really leapt out for me when I looked at the notes from the conversation, and I feel that I've done that. I feel that I do that as well, perhaps less than I used to do. But I think we all do it, right? But we don't always talk about it. So. And that means that we think that we're the only ones. We're the only one thinking like that, the only one that's feeling like that, trying to do that. And then we start beating ourselves up about what we're doing, and off the mind goes on its little trip. So let's discuss that. So why did you say that? Why was that something that you think is important enough to raise in your chat with me?
I think because I try to examine in my old age feelings that I might have squashed down, maybe things that happened in my childhood or in my youth that I didn't want to feel. And so I might have tucked those away somewhere. And when I listen to adoptees who talk about this trauma that they have experienced, they talk about a primal wound. And I don't know what that means exactly. I didn't think that I had that. But so many of us have problems with relationships or lack of self-esteem. And I wonder, can those be traced to our beginning? Does an infant actually suffer if taken from one woman and placed in the arms of another? Can we be tied so closely to someone in a 9-month period that a lifetime of nurture by someone else does not soothe us? I mean, I think there's so many more questions than answers. So I think in retrospect, and they say that hindsight is 2020. I try to get in touch with those feelings now. I try to think, did that actually happen to me? Was I feeling a certain way? Was I having a longing of some sort, and I didn't pay attention to it? Did I just tuck that away? And maybe that's what happens to a lot of adoptees, and those feelings, come to the surface later when we decide to examine that.
Wow. Yeah. There's so much there. There's so much there. And as you say, so many more questions than answers. The thing that so I just dropped my pen. I sounded very Yorkshire then, didn't I? Yeah, dropped my pen. And what a great accent you have. For me, the primal wound is best understood as a feeling. Actually, it's not a physical thing, isn't it? In the sense of like when I was a kid and cut my hand with a Swiss Army knife, right? The primal wound is a feeling, and that is the feeling that trauma is a feeling. I guess one of the questions that I'm looking at the moment is, how does that feeling of loss of our birth mother, how does that become a thought that we're not good enough? Do you see what I mean? There's a pre-verbal sense of loss. We were talking about our dogs before we started recording. So unfortunately, since we last spoke, as I said, we've lost our older dog. She was 12. We had to have her put to sleep. She was suffering a lot. We will be getting a new little sister for Rosie in a couple of months. We've got some vacation coming up, so we're not rushing into it. We don't want to go on vacation and have to put the dog in kennels or whatever. But this will be our fourth dog, and I will be, no doubt, me and my wife will be kept awake by our puppy crying because the puppy has lost its mum. So there's, on one hand, we're talking about a feeling of loss, and how, but there's something weird going on, that a feeling of loss becomes a sense that we're not, a thought that we're not good enough, you know. And there's that, to me, is gets to the biggest question. That's the biggest question for me, for us adoptees, to explore and to question our belief, because for me, the primal wound is something I believed to be true until I didn't.
Do you believe that every adoptee has that wound? Do you believe that some of us didn't realize we had a loss until much, much later? And I really think that the family who rears the adopted child is key. What kind of life did they provide their child, their emotional support, their answers to their questions? You know, I think all of that plays into whether a child actually feels that loss. And is it something inherent in us that we don't feel like we were good enough to be kept? Or as we become adults, are we able to understand that no one relinquishes a child without there being some kind of trauma for them, some kind of circumstances that they cannot overcome to keep this child of their own? So, you know, the loss, I think, is felt more by the birth parent than the child, at least at first, because, you know, just as that puppy is taken from its mother and a child is taken from its mother, if they are given all that they need at that time, which is comfort and love and food and shelter, you know, at that time, is that all that they need? You know, or is there something deep inside that thinks this isn't enough? Or is it until we wait until much later and can actually understand what happened that we begin to have these questions or doubts?
Wow. I did a whole, I don't know if you saw that, but we did a whole webinar, an hour and a quarter, on this last week. So on the primal wound. I can only, so I didn't feel that I was wounded by adoption until I was 40. And I came, people say, well, I came out of the fog. I did some work and was, shall we say, yeah. How do I put this? I did some work. I did some work on myself and resolved my relationship with my feelings. Okay, and then I read the primal wound, and the primal wound took me down again. So I believed it. So you asked, is every do I believe that every adoptee is primarily wounded? I don't know, because I only know what's gone on for me. For me, the primal wound was something that I believed in until I realized that who we truly are is fundamentally unwoundable. Now, I have felt wounded, but have I been wounded? Feeling one thing and being it are two separate, two completely separate things for me. So there's a separation between how I feel and who I am. I believe that. Yeah, I know.
That's a huge distinction. I think that's the most important distinction that we can make. And, I hear some adoptees blaming adoptive families for adoption, for the whole system. And they claim that the adoptees should have stayed with the birth family. What if these birth families were not given a choice, by family or society? They were heaped with shame or embarrassment, especially in the baby scoop era here in the US from the 40s to the 80s. Secrets were kept for years. And I wonder, does open adoption alleviate that? I've seen some work beautifully and some fail miserably. And it sounds like a solution, but then there are so many complications. So, I think that certainly the system can be strengthened and we can find ways to work within the system, but I don't think anyone should be blamed. And I certainly don't want to see adoptees bickering among themselves, because we all have different perspectives and circumstances. And if some activists can change the system for the better, then more power to them, and I applaud them. But for those who had happy childhoods and adoring adoptive families, I don't want to see them criticized.
Yeah. Well, I had a happy childhood, and I take everything on board in terms of what you say about the system. And my focus is on me being in the best place that I can, and so that I can go out into the world, so I can enjoy my life, and I can go out in the world and make some change. So I do see some adoptees who are focusing on the external world rather than their internal world. And for me, I'm focused on my internal world. So I'm focused on my internal world, how I'm feeling, how the people that I'm talking with are feeling, how I am understanding how those people are feeling, and creating hopefully a little bit of peace and love and a welcoming community. That's how I choose to spend my life. I don't choose to spend my life trying to get bureaucracies to change, because if we focus on that, then we're waiting for the world to change before we can feel good, then we're going to be waiting an awful long time. Yeah.
Well, when I looked at the title of your podcast, Thriving Adoptees, I had to look up the definition of thrive. And for a child, an animal, or a plant, it means to grow or develop well, to prosper or flourish. And this is my favorite line, is to progress toward or realize a goal despite or because of circumstances. And that is truly my hope for all adoptees, for all of us to reach our goals despite or even because of our circumstances, and that all means something different to everyone, whether it's a happy life, a successful career, children of our own, whatever it may be, not squashing those feelings down, but thriving in whatever circumstances we find ourselves, because I think we can look around the world, and certainly we can always find people in far worse circumstances than our own, for all the child abuse that's going on in this world. Those children have a long way to go to get to where they can thrive in the world, but many do. I just interviewed on my podcast a man who was not adopted, but abuse from his own family set him back for years. But then he found a way to move past that, to forgive and to forget, and to have a very successful business and family, and he is thriving. So that's what I hope for all of us. And no matter what our circumstances and where we came from or where we're going, that we can thrive.
Yeah. You asked whether people have where every adoptee has a primal wound or not. My view on my own primal wound is it's like a paper cut compared to what other adoptees have been through. Their wound looks more like a shark bite, right? Somebody's taking a big chunk out of them. In terms of they've been through more stuff, they've been through more trauma, and on top of the trauma to do with separation from our birth mothers, they've been perhaps they've been through some through some abuse or neglect, or maybe they have been adopted into in a family that was very different to theirs, and they didn't feel that they fitted in. They didn't look like they fitted in, like a transracial adopted. And some have been through tricky and more than tricky stuff in the family and also outside of the family. So the kind of like the trauma layers up, and so I sometimes feel that my primal wound, if such or the feelings, the extent to which I have felt wounded, shall we say, has been much smaller than others. And what gives me great hope, though, is that the people that have been through a lot more than me have also come through the other side of that. And so if they can do it, then anybody can do it, given the right kind of the right support. And that, for me, that the key thing that you said was about this, when you're describing the thriving out of the dictionary, is this word progress. So with progress, we're looking to look forward, and so we look forward rather than back. And that's why I've been a big fan of coaching. Because coaches have always encouraged me to look forward, not back. I've done some therapy, not a lot of therapy. I've done hours and hours and hours. I don't know how many hundreds of hours, thousands of hours of coaching, being coached. And coaches have always got me to focus on the future rather than the past. And one of my favorite quotes I've heard on this is, the past is a place of reference, not a place of residence.
That's very good. And I think when we're squashing these feelings down and we're mired in our emotions and thinking that the first act of our life was rejection from the person who gave birth to us, then, I think we need to sit down and listen to these birth mothers who don't have that same experience at all. They're not, I've been told by the ones I've interviewed, they're not rejecting us at all. They are in a place that they cannot keep us, not provide for us. And it is the greatest act of love. It is the greatest sacrifice of their entire lives to place us in a home that they hope can give us everything that they cannot. So when we're mired in emotions, thinking we were rejected and having problems with that, I think we need to maybe sit down with a birth mother who can describe the feelings and the anxiety and the anguish that they had at relinquishment, as well as the rest of their lives. Because when I met my birth mother, she told me that she had prayed in every cathedral in Europe, hoping that I had not been placed in a home that she had read in the newspaper was causing child abuse to happen. She was the one who was living in anguish. I was not. I was having a happy childhood with a very secure family. And so I had to assure her that she did the right thing. She could not keep me, and she shouldn't carry guilt and shame for the rest of her life for doing what was the greatest sacrifice of her life.
Yeah. So true. So true. What if I could kind of sum up what helps us heal for me is when we have when we change our minds about our story, or when we have a change of heart. I think that's probably more accurate. When we have a change of heart, so we see birth mother's predicament, and we see that the shame that they were that they were feeling, the predicament that they were in, and that insight, that evidence, perhaps that's word, that evidence that we see then leads us to a change of the way that we see our story. For me, that kind of epiphany, or that insight, or that new way of thinking, that for me is one of the fundamental stages in our healing. What do you make of that?
I agree. And I think to put ourselves into those birth mothers' places is just vital for us to understand their circumstances and to be grateful that they gave us life. They didn't have to. Many of them had other choices, other options, but they decided to go ahead with their pregnancy and to give birth to us. I think about that a lot. And I think about, that was 9 months out of her life. She had to go away. She had to live in a maternity home. She had to give birth to a baby she knew she wasn't going to keep. Talk about a primal wound. To me, that is the primal wound.
Yeah. I'm reading I'm listening to an audiobook by a lady that's going to come on a birth mum that's coming on the show. And it goes into great detail about this, what was happening in the 60s in the States, where the pressure that she was under, the felt helplessness, really, of her predicament, and the attitude towards her, the lack of any such
understanding.
Sorry, yeah, lack of understanding, but also the fact that it didn't that did not apply. That did not apply to the birth father, right? I mean, he got away scot-free, you know. He didn't have this. He didn't have this stuff, which as a bloke is kind of tough. Is tough for me.
That's exactly why I wrote my first book. Although I made it fiction, I didn't make it strictly memoir. There is some of my memoir running through it. I called it No Names to Be Given, talking about those babies in the nursery at a maternity home. And the premise of the story is in the 60s when 3 unwed women meet at a maternity home in New Orleans to relinquish their babies. And they had to return home as if nothing transpired. And that was that baby scoop era that we were talking about. And I think a lot of us talk about our feelings, talk about trying to find closure. The word closure is always tossed around when we talk about a search for our original family. And I think it means something different to everyone. You know, some people long for another family. Maybe they didn't have a good adoptive family, so they're longing for a family that they hope will take them in and be their true family. Others of us just want our health records. We weren't left with any health records. So when we go into a doctor's office and they say, is there cancer or heart disease or diabetes in your family? We have to say, I don't know, because I'm adopted, and we have to start from scratch, trying to figure out our ailments. So that's important too. And I hope that the adoptive system these days is doing a better job of leaving some health records with children who are being adopted.
Yeah. So I wanted to, you used this word closure, and it struck me that that's, it seemed to me that closure is on two levels. So from we've been talking about so far about squashing our feelings. So closure on one level seems to me to be like an end of the pain, and then at another level, closure seems to me is an end of the questions. So we look for closure is in if we're pursuing a route, we're going through search and reunion. We're looking for an end to the questions. And then emotionally, we're looking for an end to the pain as well. Does closure mean? And I'd like to dive into those two bits. But does closure mean anything else to you at a kind of like a top level, other than the end of the questions and the end of the pain?
No, as a novelist, I like to think about closure as being the end of different chapters. In a book, you have many, many chapters. And I think we can have closure at many different endings, and I think each chapter can lead to the next. We might have closure that we found our birth family. We might have closure that we've met that family, or that we found out about health records. There might be another chapter that opens where you have a relationship with that family, or maybe you deepen a relationship with the adoptive family that you had. There are all types of chapters in our lives, and I think each one of them ends, but it's not the end of the novel. It leads to the next chapter. And that's what I would like for us all to keep keep continuing and growing and expressing our feelings. I think closure for me, when I found my birth family, just meant that I was able to more fully express those feelings and emotions about that journey. But that journey wasn't over. I did have a relationship with that birth family. It didn't take the place of the adoptive family that I had, but it enriched my life in many ways. And I think there's enough love in all of us to be spread around to lots of different families and lots of different relationships. My oldest daughter adopted 4 older children. They were from age 16 to 8. And you would think that children coming into a family at those ages could never be assimilated into, the family and for everyone to feel that they were truly a part of the family. But it's worked beautifully. That's another chapter, is the adoption story can continue in the same family in beautiful ways. And it doesn't have to, be traumatic. And these children are thriving there.
Yeah. I think you make a very valid point, because I'm looking at a once and done ending, and you're talking about chapters and breaking it down. And on reflection, that's a far more true to life part. So a true to life view of closure, I think we keep on. So it's that ongoing piece. So I heard this expressed really beautifully. It's the journey to seeing who we are, and then the journey in seeing that more and more. So the end of chapter 1, and this is after we've come out of the fog, I think, we see who we are. We separate. We realize that we are not our feelings. We realize that we are not our trauma. We realize that we are not our past. And then we move forward, forgetting that, remembering it, forgetting it, remembering it, forgetting it, remembering it, and that's kind of how it goes for the rest of our life. But we're sold this idea, and I fell for it too, so much that I looked at closure as once and done. When I was expressing it to you, when I was asking you a question, I saw closure as once and done, whereas really it's more like a book of infinite chapters.
And I have always loved historical homes. I can walk into a home that was built in the 1700s or the 1800s, and I can feel the families who live there and the emotions and the memories of those people and the walls of that home. And I kind of feel that that's the way our bodies are, that's the way our minds and our souls are. I think we absorb all the people, all the relationships, all the emotions we felt throughout our lives. And that's what creates us. That's what enriches us. That's what we grow into. At my age, I'm always looking back, and I always have some beautiful memories and some terrible memories. And I think of the way they've shaped me, and they've made me the person I am today. And I don't discount any of those. I regret some of my choices in life, but those took me down a certain path and made me into the person that I am today. I wouldn't have been the same person if I hadn't been tested, if I hadn't experienced some of that trauma. And I just think that we all are growing into the people that we're supposed to be in spite of those circumstances, in spite of the beginning of our lives, in spite of the trauma that we felt, just like those ancient homes. When we are truly ancient, that we'll have absorbed all of that, all of life's beauty and trauma, and we will be so much richer because of it.
Yeah. What came to mind when you were describing that is this on one hand, it's the connection of us all in one spirit, one eternal spirit. On another hand, it's the passing on of kind of like generational trauma. I'm thinking about some time I've spent in Africa. So we used to go on this time of year, and we used to go to the Gambia on holiday a lot, for a sun and beach holiday, right? And Gambia is where you remember the Alex Haley book Roots? Do you remember that, and the TV show from the 70s? Okay, so Alex Haley was in a Mandinka tribe in what is now Gambia or Senegal, that area. So Gambia is the English colony, and Senegal is Gambia was the English colony, and Senegal was a French colony that wrapped itself around it. So yeah, Alex Haley was Kunta Kinte was Mandinka tribe, and I've got to know a lot of people over there in the Gambia, and when I hear of stuff in the States, I think of like the generational trauma that's passed down as a result of what we Brits did or were part of in terms of the slave trade. So there's that generational trauma piece. And also I see that, when we talk about the shame that our birth mums went through, I see maybe there's some generational trauma that's passed down from them, because they are very aware of their shame in a way that we aren't when we're born. I wanted to go back to something the squashing, a distinction between squashing our feelings and realizing that our feelings aren't who we are, separating from our feelings, being less concerned about our feelings, being less emotophobic, as in having a phobia about our feelings. So what does that mean? What does that mean to you, Julia? What comes to your mind when we look at squashing our feelings versus separating from them?
I grew up in the South in the United States, in the deep South, and from an early age, we were taught that you didn't talk about certain topics. You didn't talk about religion. You didn't talk about politics. You did not discuss money with anyone. There were just certain guidelines that we all knew, even as children, that it would be rude, that it would not be using your manners to discuss any of this in polite company. So I think squashing those emotions is kind of like a repressed society. I think there are just certain things that we don't talk about, that we can't discuss fully. And I think that takes us until we become much older, until we become much wiser, to know the difference in squashing and repressing and actually being able to discuss and to feel those emotions. And it's okay to feel those emotions and to let those out. But our lives can't be determined by just raw emotions. We have to harness them. We have to try to figure them out and to be able to move past them, or to live with them, or to grow from them. We have to make them work for us. We're not going to work for those emotions. We want them to work for us. And how can we be propelled into something better from those emotions? It's okay to feel. It's okay to cry. It's okay to rant or rave or have anger. But then you have to really harness those and to make them part of you, but to not let them rule you. You can't go out into the world and make a difference, or do good works, or even have a worthy career if you're emotional all the time, if you allow your emotions to rule you. So I think that's one way that we have to, understand our emotions and experience them, express them, but we can't let them rule us.
No, there's so much there, isn't there? If there was one word, if we're saying that squashing our emotions isn't healthy for us, it's not good for us. Squashing our feelings isn't good for us. If there was one word out of, because you gave us a lovely list there. If there was one word for you that summed up to be something that is beneficial, if we're saying squashing is disadvantageous, if there was one word that you could come up with from the list that you gave us, or maybe from another, what would you say would be beneficial rather than squashing them? We should X them. What would that?
I would probably say adapt them. All of my life, I've kind of been a chameleon. I was a single parent myself for many years, and I had to learn to cope. I couldn't afford to just live on my emotions, or to only care about myself. I had young children to take care of. And so I had to adapt. I had to become the person in my mind that I wanted to be. I had to see into the future. I had to say, what do I want to be for myself and then for my children? And so I had to adapt. If I felt those emotions rising to the surface, I had to find a way to deal with them. I had to create a way to do that without harming myself or my children. So I think we can adapt. I think we can adapt to our circumstances. I think we can rise above the trauma. But I think adaptation is a way to deal with those emotions.
So are you advocating adapting our feelings?
I'm adapting myself through those feelings.
Okay. Yeah. And if there was something that you were going to do with the feelings themselves, what would that be?
I always think that if we're feeling something that's very powerful, to share that with someone. I truly believe that relationships in this life are the most important thing we have. And if we can find someone else, just like you're doing with this podcast, if we can find others who are feeling some of the same emotions and feelings that we are, to talk to them, to be able to say, this is how I'm feeling. How are you feeling? Have you ever experienced this? How did you deal with it? Just having a conversation with other people about the same topics is so vital and so important to us. And I think that's how we learn and grow, and to have a confidant, to have someone that we can pick up the phone and say, this is really getting to me today. How did you deal with this when this happened to you? I think that's so important.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the sharing one. As I was asking you the question, I was kind of formulating what would be my favorite out of what you said. And did you say embrace, or was that just me making that one up? Did you say embrace our emotions?
I do think we should embrace our emotions. I don't think that every emotion is bad, even the most powerful ones. And I think they become a part of us. We just have to know how to harness them and how to make them work for us.
Yeah. I heard a lovely soundbite on this a couple of years ago that stuck with me. So it was turning our mess into our message. I think that's a lovely way of.
I do think that's lovely. And, there were many times in my life when I thought, everyone thinks that I can't do this. Everyone thinks, oh, she was a little adopted girl who became a single parent and, she's not going to be able to achieve anything. Well, I let that motivate me. I let everyone's misconceptions of me, misunderstandings of me motivate me and make me become a much more successful person. So I wanted to turn that negative into a positive for sure, for my life and for my children's lives.
Yeah. Another one I heard on this that comes to mind as you're speaking is to turn our SH1T into manure. It helps us grow.
I think that's great. And I don't think that anyone should underestimate another person, because there's something deep inside us, whether it's a wound or whether it's that paper cut that you're talking about, or whether it's just a desire that, we're going to make this place better for ourselves and for others.
Yeah. What do you think that is?
I think that I do want to see this small planet that we have been gifted. I do want to see it be better because of my life on it. Maybe I was an accident. Maybe I was a mistake. Maybe that's the way my life began, but it's not the way my life is going to end.
Yeah. I heard something last week actually that echoes this in a really lovely way. Echoes it, summarizes it, I think. Nature doesn't make mistakes.
Yeah. I believe that.
So that feels like a great place to bring the conversation in. You've mentioned your book, so listeners, I would encourage you to check out in the show notes links to Julia's books. But before we sign off, is there something that you'd like to share that I've not given you opportunity to share?
I just think that all adoptees are worthy, and there's a reason that we are who we are and where we are in this life. And I just think that all of us have a place and all of us have a mission. And I hope that we all are able to fulfill that mission and be able to see it work out in our own lives, our own times.
Yeah, lovely. And what's your mission?
Well, at first, my mission was to raise my children and to have them become productive citizens, which they all have, and now it's to love my grandchildren and to show those adopted grandchildren that we all have a place here and that we're all worthy. And I'm able to see that as well.
Yeah. Beautiful. And of course, listeners, the clearer we can see our own worth, the better our chances of helping others see their own worth too. So thank you very much, Julia. It's been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, listeners, and we'll speak to you again very soon. Bye.